Perfect. Afternoon, Gerald. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this special Employment Committee meeting. I'm Councillor Cal Concrete, Chair of the committee. We are recording now, just to be clear, so the live stream is available for anyone who wants to watch along online. I'd also like to draw your attention to the following. So, in terms of safety information, if the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in front of the Civic. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust fire marshal regulations, if you are signed into the Guildhall, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. I also remind you that this meeting will be live streamed and that the camera zooms in to show the speaker. This is linked to the microphones. Therefore, can I please remind all attendees to turn their microphones on to speak and then off once you have finished speaking. Members of the public, not that we have any, but are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera. Okay, moving on. In terms of deputations, we've received no deputation requests in respect of this meeting. The next item is apologies for absence. None have been received prior to the meeting. Are there any additional to note? No. Okay, move on. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest to declare in respect of the item being considered today? Okay, no declarations. Thank you very much. Moving on then to item 3, the transport review. Members will have seen the report have been circulated. Hopefully we've had time to go through it, understand the contents, and perhaps think of some questions you wish to ask today. But by way of introduction, I think I'm going to ask David Williams, Chief Exec, to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Chair. And first of all, thank you to members for having this special meeting today, bank holiday weekend, etc. I'm just conscious that we're very keen to stabilise issues within the transport section. So this report follows on from your meeting on the 9th of March when the committee agreed to review the structure of the Regeneration Directorate as set out at the beginning of the report. We have, as agreed with you at that meeting, we've undertaken a review. We did that with external facilitation, including an independent peer review, and the main purposes of that are set out in the report. The group that did it were a company called Shared Intelligence, along with the Local Government Association, and we had a council leader, a council director who actually herself is now a chief executive, joining them. There were 3 main areas in their report. The first was the relations between elected members and the transport function and ways to improve that. The second was around stakeholder relationships and ways to improve those. And the third was more of a catch-all, but specifically around any ways in which the existing structure could be improved. I have to say that we do use peer reviews and independent reviews quite a lot as a council. It can be a very effective way of getting insight, of having a mirror held up to ourselves, but also learning from other councils. I think in my 15 years here, I think I'd say that this one is probably one of the most fruitful and direct ones that we've ever had. And it was very obvious, even in preparing the brief for the piece of work, that we were beginning to clarify issues that we needed to address. I think the process that Shared Intelligence took us through, that was members and officers and in plenary, was really valuable. And I think their report gave us some very good pointers. What the report also did was highlight how highly considered the transport function is nationally, including by some of our principal stakeholders like the Department for Transport and the agencies. And they actually reflect in the report the huge relative success compared to anywhere else in the country in terms of the council's ability to attract funding. So the structure of the sessions involved interviews with staff, with members, and all of the groups represented in here were engaged in that, and plenary sessions. And after we received their report, we had a plenary session about the findings of the report, and I'm really pleased to say that the conclusion of that discussion, both in terms of the recommendation of our consultants but also the views of those in the room, was that there was no justification for a separate director of transport, that we should continue with our existing structure at director level, and we needed to make sure that we continued with the good work that had been put in train through the commissioning and engagement of the work. So my recommendation to you is very firmly that we do not change the senior management structure of the council, and for your purposes as the employment committee, that relates to director level and above. We do have changes and adjustments that we need to make below that because we have had staff turnover. We also have to make sure that we've got appropriate support to deal with the latter stages of the PFI and whatever follows on from that PFI in terms of the delivery of the council's services. Before I shut up, just one mea culpa from me, before I don't want to embarrass Sue. The report that went to you in March contained a spurious reference to a saving of £100,000. When I do these reports, by and large, because I don't like doing the typing of them, I take an earlier report and customise it and gradually completely replace the report with the new material. Somehow or other, the reference to the £100,000 saving, which is probably about 4 or 5 years ago now, stayed in the report. So this isn't a fault of Sue and her finance team. This was an administrative error in the production of the report and ended up being, I'm afraid, and I apologise, somewhat of a red herring. Chairman, my recommendation is firmly that you accept the recommendations of the report.
Thank you, David. Members, your opportunity now for any questions or comments on the report and the presentation we've had. Gerald.
Thanks, Chair. And thank you, David. I was initially very keen on the idea of a Director of Transport, but I think it is right to recognise that the enormous change for the good that has come about with the work that Felicity and Martin have been doing there, and it is really enormously different. And I think their recommendation to us as people who work in the area is that we stick with the current structure and we don't move to a Director of Transport, and that seems sensible to listen to. So I'd like to put on record my thanks to Felicity and Martin for the work they're doing, because it really has been a huge change for the better, and that will continue to change, I think. So integrating the PFI team into the rest of the transport team is a real positive, and both Martin and Felicity will be taking that forward. So I think this is a sensible report and I'd be happy to support it.
Thank you. Simon?
Thanks, Cal. I was going to kick the Chief Executive about his erroneous comments, but as he's fallen on his sword, I don't think I need to explore that any further. But I will suggest that he gets somebody else to write his reports for him in future, or at least type them, shall we say, rather than cut and paste. I'm very much on the same page as Gerald. I've been the Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation. It's fair to say it's probably the fastest moving of the portfolios that we have in the City Council, and the staff there are a great team. And I think this is probably more a function of the fact that They've had a bit of a perfect storm where they've had several very key members of their team, and not necessarily at senior level, but some very, I'm thinking about people like Nicky Musson, shall we say, who is a glue when it comes to TROs and stuff like that, have all left the department over the past sort of 6 to 9 months, and I think it has created an issue within that particular department, and I don't think that fiddling around with the directorate is the way to do it. We've got a good team there with Felicity and Martin, who they've already demonstrated at the peer review that they are moving in the right direction. That's been reflected in this particular report, so I think it is the right thing to do is to leave it as it is, and as members provide any support that we can to that team so that we get them to the level that they obviously aspire to be at. I will make a couple of comments on the general report. And perhaps there is an element of criticism here I could do, and that's 4.1.1 and 4.1.2. And it may be something that the Constitution Working Party might like to take on board, is that 4.1.2, now this is obviously referring to Traffic and Transportation Department as it is. Protocol should be developed to govern access to information and papers by members of other political groups, and a timetable for this needs to be agreed and built upon good practice from other local authorities. That to me is something that goes beyond traffic and transportation, because I'm sure there are members of all opposition parties that have had frustrations with getting information out of most of the portfolios and directorships that we've got as opposition spokesmen. And there must be a mechanism that could be built in, perhaps as part of the Constitution Working Group, that we get that sort of information in a timely manner. We've all had, certainly in my group, emails where we put information in, requesting information to officers, waited 2 or 3 weeks, and then had a reply that essentially says, I'm just discussing this with the cabinet member and I will come back to you at some point. Now, that to me is an inappropriate reply, that anything that opposition members are requesting of directorates should have to get the approval of the cabinet members. Now, I'm not levelling the blame at any cabinet members. I think there is a structure misunderstanding going on in that respect. And I think the Constitution Working Party perhaps is somewhere that, I'm not suggesting a recommendation on this, far from it, is somewhere that might be able to build something in there so we understand that officer member protocol in a bit more detail. But it was just those 2 paragraphs that struck me, that even though they are directed at what's going on in traffic and transportation, I think is something that is a wider issue that needs to be taken up elsewhere. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. Darren?
Thanks, Cal. Yeah, I too would support the recommendations in this proposal. I think the idea, I mean, I'm old enough to remember the original version of the original cut and paste of that document, and the idea that somehow this would all save £100,000. I think someone thought it was rubbish at the time, and it remains rubbish. And that shouldn't be the purpose of doing anything. It should be to do the right thing. So I would support this. A few observations. I think firstly what Simon has just said is something I think we as Liberal Democrats felt in opposition, not with Simon, not with Simon's team, but with other parts of the authority. I think there are also issues around our role as ward councillors, particularly in something like transport, and what that means, and whether, for instance, if somebody has got a very good traffic idea, whether the portfolio holder should know. It's that sort of dynamic I think is important. So it cuts every single way. But I think there's a fair points in there. I would say for me, this has been around trying to get an end rather than a means. An end has been to try and make sure that the value of transportation is recognised within the existing structure and within a structure that is relevant. Because, as Simon says, this is fast moving. It's also strategically important across a whole range of areas. Public health, housing, environment, as well as transportation and regeneration. I've always felt having it within the regeneration team would cause problems, and I'm delighted that the peer review has improved the performance, as you said, David, has improved the performance of the team as a whole to an extent that those issues are now not required. and that's why I'm pleased about that. I may have also talked to the current portfolio holder as well, and I know her views are very similar, which is highly encouraging. There's one other thing I would like to add, Cal, to the recommendations, if I may, and it's David's point about the high regard in which the transport team is held by key external stakeholders. I think it would be very good. I mean, Simon's mentioned, people have left, and that's fair. But I think to help them, it would be very good if we noted the high regard in which the transport team is held by external stakeholders. So that would be my proposal. Happy to take any seconders. If nobody wants to do it, that's also fine. I'm happy with the recommendations as they are.
Okay, thank you, Darren, and thank you for offering to second, Simon. I'm guessing we need a specific form of words for the report. Do you want to clarify?
Notes the recommendations of the peer review panel's comments about the high regard in which the transport team is held by external stakeholders. Is that an accurate distillation of what you said, David?
I think actually there's a statement in there about the how it is. It may well be that. I was going to say, David, you can cut and paste that bit.
Yeah, it'll only cost you £100.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Happy to add that to the recommendations that are put forward later. Are there any other comments or questions you want to make at this stage? Natasha?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to respond to the point being made, Simon, around the protocols. I think it's absolutely we can incorporate that into the work of the Constitution Working Group. I think it's a good idea. I think I would also want to add that we recognise that there is a responsibility on officers as well, and that came out through the broader LGA peer review of the Council, so we've already got some work underway to look at our induction for new staff and new managers that picks up the political aspect of the organisation and giving more training to those staff and managers in the dynamics, the decision making and the overall governance. So we're working with democratic services teams and hoping to be able to draw on the experience of yourselves as members to participate in training officers as they join the council and some of our members. And I've had some offers from members to do that. So just to provide assurance that work is underway.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? David, is there anything you wanted to respond to or kind of sum up in terms of the report?
No, I certainly note the comments. Natasha's absolutely right, and we are in fact piloting a piece of training quite shortly, I think, that we're cutting, pasting from another authority in terms of political sensitivity, and it'll be very interesting to see how successful that is. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, David. Okay, in the absence of any additional contributions, I think we can move on to the recommendations. So, members, the recommendations are, what I'll do is I'll read them all out and then I'll check with you about whether we want to vote en masse or whether there's any difference of opinion about any of them. So, one, as originally drafted in the report, is that the recommendation of the peer review in relation to the 3 key areas of investigation is to be noted. Recommendation 2 is the pros and cons of the creation of a new directorate or director of transport be noted. 3, the transport function be retained within the Directorate of Regeneration. And 4, the further work to be undertaken by officers to improve structures within the Regeneration Directorate in line with the recommendations of the peer review be noted. And now there was Darren's 5th one, which I haven't got the exact words in the but it was about including reference to the high regards and the external stakeholders hold the transport function within. Are people happy to take all those as is? Do I have a proposer for all 5? Darren and a seconder? Simon, thank you. Okay, so we've got all 5 recommendations for as originally drafted, in addition to Darren's one that's been proposed today. And members, are these recommendations agreed? Agreed unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, members. That concludes the business of the agenda for this meeting. And thank you for your attendance and close the meeting at 2:19.